Okay, so that little bit of drama is over with. Last Sunday, I shared my adapter dongle, where you want to call that, for Amy to make her presentation. She got it back to me, but I didn't get it back in the case. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere, probably in one of my jackets or something that I was wearing that day. But anyway, the bottom line is I'm using the one from the church, and it works. So that was a little bit of drama. Wasn't sure that they would talk to each other, but they do. So good morning, church friends, and I want to summarize for those of you who are here today, but have missed the previous 6 installments of The Art of Spiritual Warfare. It was meant to be a 7-part series, and let me just double check and make sure. I think my mic is on. Yes. So before we bring it to an end, I want to wrap up each of the preceding messages perhaps in one sentence or so. Installment number 1 was to remind us all that we are actually engaged in a warfare with Satan. And yet there is a great battle, perhaps the greatest battle of our collective and corporate lives is looming ahead of us. And therefore we must each and corporately put on God's armor that He has provided us. You can say amen if you like what I said. Angels will applaud in heaven, and I will feel good about it too. Number 2, we've been called and chosen for this life of war. You didn't have to sign up. You were called. You were drafted by God Himself, chosen for this life of war, and also to participate in the heavenly victory. In order to do that, however, we must surrender our plans for our lives to God's plan to fulfill our life's purpose. It's a matter of daily surrender to God's purposes. Thirdly, we have been called to holiness. For it's only in holiness that true freedom can be experienced. Fourthly, the enemy's weakness. Know your enemy's weakness. What's the devil's weakness? Maybe you remember my answer is that the devil simply cannot tell a love story. So weakness. Our victory, however, in the Holy Spirit depends on our knowing God's love for us individually. Thank you, Doctor, for reminding the children that Jesus loves them. That is a powerful message that we each can learn and know that even if we know we're loved, it's nice to be reminded. I know that there was a wife of many years, and Tom, this isn't your wife, but you were mentioning how many years you've been married, but there was a wife of many years, and she was crestfallen one day, and so the husband was a bit solicitous. He says, "What's the matter?" And she says, "I don't think you love me anymore." And he says, "Whatever gave you that idea?" She says, "Well, you haven't told me that in years." And he says, "Listen, remember when we were courting?" "Yes." "Remember me telling you I loved you?" "Yes." "When I change my mind, I'll let you know." Now that's man's version versus women's version. Women would rather hear it a little oftener than once in a lifetime. And so I'm reminding that as sons and daughters of God in faith, it's good to rehearse and hear again that Jesus loves us. Can't hear it too often. Fifthly, our holiness, if we ever experience it, our holiness comes as a gift. Can't earn it, can't buy it. We can show interest in it. We can be surrendered to God's will, but holiness is relayed to us by a convoy. And remember the convoy that of heaven's devising. It starts with the written word, and then we hear it through the spoken word oftentimes. And lastly, oftentimes, angels personally intervene to bring us heaven's deliverance by our guardian angel. So, and that deliverance is in a moment of temptation. The angels bring us strength from heaven to minister to us so that we may not be victimized by Satan's devices. Our last topic that we covered before this final one was the winner's edge. Somebody has it because they ended up winning. What's the winner's edge? Well, it's easy to say God's on our side, but let's talk about the winner's edge from our perspective. It begins in the mind. And do you see yourself fully surrendered to Christ this morning? Anything less than that, you have static on the line, you have rust on the connection, you don't have a good connection. But if you see yourself fully surrendered to Christ, you can also see the two of you, Jesus and you, as allies. That he will be your ally even as you are his. Now, we're talking today about final siege. It's the last of this series. It's also the last chapter in this art of spiritual warfare. There is a siege that is going on. And the final siege against the gates of hell is about to begin. The church has been battling hell since Jesus built his church, but the final siege is about to begin. And my question this morning, do you see yourself intelligently, meaning adequately preparing to live out your part, to be where God needs you to be in this final spiritual battle? So let's look at how the Bible describes it coming and happening to us. Then the sixth angel poured out his bowl, vial, bowl, doesn't matter. It's a container that holds something. He poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. Now the sixth angel is the sixth of seven angels. These seven angels are pouring out bowls or vials of punishment, woes, or we might call them plagues upon planet Earth. And they crescendo, they may start this process just prior to the close of probation, but we think about these seven last plagues as not bringing anyone to repentance. It's just one of God's ways of showing judgment on a false life. And so they poured out this bowl upon the great river Euphrates, and the water dried up, so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. Now, these angels and their bowls are God's executive agencies for retributive punishment for the wicked, for the lost, for those headed to perdition anyway. They're getting judgments, public judgments, so that people on earth can see it, intelligence in heaven can see it, that they're getting this for the mistreatment of the righteous and we might also say the covenant people of God, and also all the innocents that have no one to protect them from satanic cruelty. Because idolatry is a cruel lifestyle, and it preys upon the weak. The Euphrates River is anciently associated with the city of Babylon. And I can preach this evangelistically and prove all the points, but I want to preach it pastorally and just kind of go over this because you should understand this by now, that the drying up of the Euphrates happened to ancient Babylon so that the Medes and the Persians could march down the riverbed and take Babylon from an unexpected source. The gates were left open. And so the drying up of the river Euphrates is a prophetic symbol of the end of human support for the structures and the systems of power that Babylon, or we also know Babylon is portrayed as a city, but it's also portrayed in Revelation 13 as the sea beast. So it's a drying up for the support of this sea beast. It prepares for the appearance of salvation from the Lord of righteousness at the appearance of Jesus himself with all of heaven's armies in the clouds. Continues in his vision, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, out of the mouth of the false prophet. 3 unclean powers that are reigning on planet Earth. We look at this as the false trinity, the fallen or the evil trinity that is warring against the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We have the dragon, the mouth of the beast, and the false prophet. Now, these spirits are going to become louder and manifest their voice most clearly after the close of probation. But the warning message is important, and so they must begin this deceptive work prior to the close of probation, or else the warning is moot if they would only appear after probation closes. So Bible students have deduced that they all must appear at the end of time, just prior to the close of probation, but reach their crowning work after probation closes, sweeping and holding a world in deception. It's an unholy trinity, we've mentioned. They're working in coalition with one another. They're aligned to war against the God of heaven, and they do it by attacking his saints, and perhaps even the rest of humanity that are called to be saints, because more are called to be saints than say yes. So they're warring against humanity. Now the dragon, we kind of know who the dragon is. The dragon in Revelation 12, the great red dragon, is named the devil. So the dragon is the power of Satan himself, and all of the occult powers that of every, we might say, manifestation on planet Earth. It's the devil at work. The beast is the great apostate church, a church that was called to be more like the Lamb of God, and we are sent out as disciples, as lambs among wolves. But here is a church that is running amok. It's no longer restrained by the law of God. They have their own law, which they say is above God's law. They claim to be able to change God's law. I think all of you know what church power has in writing and are very open about this. We call it the Roman branch of Christianity, that believes they no longer have to yield to God's laws, that God himself is forced to yield to their laws. And then there comes the false prophet, and we look at the false prophet as most closely fitting in with churches that began with the Reformation. They began with a claim of sola scriptura and sola fide and righteousness by faith. But now we're finding that the voices of Protestants have abdicated their belief in Bible doctrine, and they're beginning to proclaim new doctrines. You say, I hadn't heard about that. Well, maybe you haven't been keeping up with the Protestant milieu out there in the public media. Kenneth Copeland, a noted media pastor of a Protestant, says Satan conquered Christ on the cross. Do you believe that? Okay, so we have here proponents. Some of them are connected to the prosperity gospel movement. They've abdicated biblical research and doctrinal grounding in favor of stories that inflate humanity's sense of self-importance, that we don't need God, we don't need Jesus, because we were created to be gods, and we just need to re-educate humanity, and we can become our own saviors. How about this one? Another voice, I think you know who this is, Benny Hinn. Never ever go to the Lord and say, if it be thy will. Don't allow such faith-destroying words to be spoken from your mouth. Does that sound authentic? Does that sound like walking humbly with God? See, what Benny Hinn is alluding to when he uses this word faith is not the biblical faith that you and I understand that Paul was teaching in the New Testament. It's an occult construct termed the force of faith. You get a little deeper under this, and he's talking about a force of faith. It has nothing to do with biblical faith. It has to do with something that is either humanistic or demonic. Take your pick, but it is not scriptural. And yet he is claiming to be preaching and proclaiming Christian values. Kenneth Hagin. Man was created on terms of equality with God, and he could stand in God's presence without any consciousness of inferiority. Wow. Remember the great satanic lie was ye shall be as gods? Doesn't that sound like he is getting replayed at church today? Not this church, but in some churches, that God intended humanity to not be in the least bit less powerful than he was. And what's the consequential result? We don't really need God with a capital G. We need to become aware we have been created to act in life as God's little g, and we don't have to be subservient then to any ancient biblical law or doctrine. We can make it up as we go. Saville, he's a modern proponent of the name it and claim it faith or doctrine. Notice how he blames all of Job's troubles not on Satan or the great controversy, but he blames all of Job's troubles on his own faulty worldview. Job talked his world into destruction. I don't think that's very kind to Job at all. Do you? I think it's sort of blasphemous to the Bible to say that Job created his own mess. But he's trying to make a point that many of us create our own mess, which probably is at least halfway true. But to say that all we have to do is reorient our mind into power of positive thinking is not the whole story. Certainly not the everlasting gospel. Let's keep going, because we're now painting a picture of these voices that are actually spirits of demons, fallen angels, performing signs which go out to the kings of the earth, the whole world. Every level of society is going to be influenced by this. The powers of great corporate powers and political powers, sovereign entities, families, the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. So this is starting now. I think we are noticing this marshaling, this gathering. And where's it going to end? It's going to end in something called the final battle of Armageddon. Here comes yours and my admonition from the prophet of God, and I think an angel delivered it to him. Behold, says Jesus, I'm coming as a thief, unannounced. Blessed is he who watches, keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. So there is a blessing in the middle of this warning of war, spiritual battle. There is a warning to be careful, to watch and pray and keep your garments, because you don't want to end up on the day of that final battle going to war without your armor on, walking naked, and people there see your shame, your unpreparedness for battle. And they gathered them together, these three unclean spirits, this false trinity, gathered the people together in the Hebrew place termed Armageddon. Now, Armageddon is a construct of Har, or mountain, and Ghetto. Megiddo was a city on the flanks of the southern flanks of Mount Carmel. It's ancient. It's, how do we say this? Every city has a major industry. Grand Haven is, I think it's a Coast Guard capital, et cetera, et cetera. It's a county seat. Megiddo was known for, it'd be like the Chicago, south side of Chicago. They had stockyards where sheep and cattle were brought to be slaughtered, and they were skinned, and there was a leather making factory there. So they not only slaughtered, it was a slaughterhouse city, but it was also a place for the making of leather, so that it was the basis of their economy. But notice that this is the mountain of slaughter, which is asking us to think about what happened on Mount Carmel. What happened there? We have Baal worshipers and we have God worshipers. And the people of God, the people called to be saints, got confused, and many of the tribes got involved in idolatry. And so God sent a prophet, Elijah, to clarify the matter. If it be Baal, let him bring fire down on the altar. And if it be the God, Yahweh God, the God of creation, let him be in charge of bringing fire down. You remember that story? And so fire came down ultimately to Elijah's altar and not to the pretenders. And because these people, in their struggle for supremacy, had murdered God's prophets, Elijah called upon all the righteous to help him restrain the prophets of Baal, and Elijah killed all those prophets of Baal. A mountain of slaughter. It's a type. At the end of time, however, it's not just going to be apostate Israel, but as all the nations of the world will be called to a day of reckoning for their idolatry, their victimization of the innocent and the righteous, and because by this time the gospel will have gone to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, it will be calling them to accountability. Why did you reject Jesus when the everlasting gospel came to you? Why did you do it? Let's take a second look at this demonic word. It's a polished enterprise. It's not how do we say, clumsy. It's not ineffective. These frogs mean business. And those of you can see, I've never seen a frog with shark's teeth, but these frogs this artist conjured up all have shark's teeth. They're pretty mean-looking frogs. And I wouldn't want to find one of those out in the woods. 3 unclean spirits. Well, we have a rich history in the comparative study of story as Adventists. We look at all the Old Testament Bible stories, and then Paul says that all these stories are written for us living at the end of time so that we might learn from their examples. So we talk about this rich history of a story being filled with details that portray a larger, greater reality. Sometimes it's larger in the dimension of local versus global, but sometimes it's material versus spiritual. And we call these stories, which contain these truths, typologies. The Old Testament is rich in typology. In fact, the entire sanctuary system is one grand typology, which tells how God is solving the sin problem with the plan of salvation. So I hope you're already praying and planning for our Messiah's Mansion effort coming up. We talked about it at our last business session, that we want the people of this area to understand what Jesus is doing to try to have them saved at the end. There's a larger fulfillment here, future occurrence. Now, in the Exodus saga, there were 10 plagues. The second of which, if I remember the sequence, was one of frogs. Well, this is the 6th of 7 plagues, and now we're back to frogs plaguing the earth. 3 unclean spirits as frogs are plaguing the earth. They're bringing bad news to planet Earth. And frogs were held sacred to the ancient Egyptians. They named the embodiment of frog life, a frog goddess, Hecate. She was a major god in charge of fertility and childbirth. So if you were having trouble conceiving as a young Egyptian bride, you would go to the temple and you offer sacrifices to the goddess Hecate so that you could, because that's who was in charge of your being able to conceive, not the God of heaven, but Hecate. Now, there's a substantive link between this Egyptian spelling, Hequet, with a later Greek form, which is spelled Hecate. I'm going to say, you can look it up, Hecate, Hecate, who was the goddess of witchcraft. Later still, the Celts of the British Isles termed their goddess of fertility Rhiannon. She was also the muse behind poetry and music and was to be worshipped with song. I'm so glad that we had songs of praise to our Creator God today. Amen? Beautiful song, uplifting song. But there are songs that are beautiful and they're mesmerizing almost, but they're not necessarily uplifting, because it's one of the more certifiable allegations that the entire pop commercial music culture, at least of Western culture, is dedicated to the advancement of Luciferian thought. It's designed to remove the attraction and the allegiance to Christianity and Jesus and remove all of that as possible if they can remove it all from pop culture. Remember John Lennon, imagine if there was no religion, what a better world it would be. That's a voice from pop culture. And combining with theatrical arts, we've reached a time when most people do not choose to listen to sound biblical doctrine, but instead choose to guide their lives by this Fresnel lens of cunningly devised songs and fables. Nothing tangible, nothing, in writing, just if it feels good. And you ask people, how do you learn to relate to the opposite sex? In the movies. In other words, you didn't learn from the Bible, you didn't learn from principles how to behave, you learned it from movies. That's how people are guiding their life, from movies or songs. That's just one of the three voices, one voice. There's three frog-like elements that are infiltrating, communicating deception across all humanity, and they're advertising new and we might call them unexpected connections to the occult. There's a recent web post dated October 22, 2021. Maybe you caught it. It wasn't a big blurb. Here's what it said. Daughter of the late Michael Jackson, pop star, Paris Jackson, shares photos of her nearly naked while being joined by her friends, including actress Alexandra Shipp, for the celebration to honor Mother Moon. The blurb added that she was so pleased to have her own coven to participate in this pagan ritual with her. No sense of scandal, no sense of outrage over any of this. It was more accepting, as if to announce, this is the new normal, get used to it. Witches and covens and pagan rites. In 1976, this is a little more in my time frame, Stevie Nicks, female vocalist for the British pop rock group Fleetwood Mac, wrote a song titled Rhiannon. After reading an occult fantasy novel about a protagonist in that fictional book named Rhiannon. The novel only loosely can be connected to the ancient goddess of Welsh tradition, but there is a little connection there. Stevie Nicks' signature song has entered modern culture with an unexpected permanence. Most songs from the early to middle 70s have lapsed. You have to go to a golden oldies section or something to hear it. You don't hear it very much, most of the 70s music, but this one has a lot of airplay. And it's maybe because of her candor, that she said it's a song about an old Welsh witch. And it's still being played today. So, well, I don't listen to those radio stations. Well, here's the issue. I'm sure you don't. But this song about Rhiannon is played as background music at Myers, at Walmart, at Target, at all these places where you go to get your groceries. You hear this song being played. Now, you can tune it out if you want, but there's a subliminal kind of voice coming through that the frog is croaking. Now, I think the damage of the song is it seems whimsical. It doesn't seem too harmful. It doesn't talk about worshiping the devil or anything. It's more of white magic inanities. That one of those things, it's in the chorus says that you have a life that's lived by your dreams that are unwinding. In other words, the best you can hope for is your subconscious at night is guiding your conscious in the day. And so you have your dreams unwinding, and you discover after many years that love is not a principle, it's nothing to be committed to or anything. Love is a state of mind. And of course, we all know how those come and go. So don't expect love to be permanent. Don't beat yourself up if you can't stay in love forever. Rhiannon was a strong-willed woman who kind of went from one kind of flouting a convention, marrying the wrong spouse, then she had a child that died, and she was accused falsely that she had murdered the child. Later, she was exonerated, and ultimately, although she obeyed no rules, she lived happily ever after. That's the lesson of Rhiannon. You don't have to have God's 10 Commandments to guide your life. You don't have to have anybody else's rules. You can live happily ever after. But notice, in contrast to this satanic siren call to a life of whimsy and impulse, we're called to watch and keep our garments lest we end up naked. And what does that mean, naked? Well, of course, we talk about this disadvantage of going to war naked when everybody else is dressed in armor, but there's something else here involved. Remember that Adam and Eve walked naked before they sinned, and they didn't know it, and they had no shame. But after they sinned, they walked naked, and they knew it, and they were ashamed. So the walking naked is implying that unconfessed and unforsaken sin leaves each of us naked. Judgment. We need to have the clothing of Christ's righteousness to hide our nakedness. I put this question up because it was a new thought for me in researching this message. Was Jehu the man who drove his chariot furiously? I've been said that I'm kind of like Jehu. I rode one of my church members' project cars. He built a Camaro with a 700 horsepower engine. And we were on the street with it. He was driving, but we went from 0 to 100 faster than I'd ever gone 0 to 100. It led me to want to do that again, so I bought a motorcycle. And it was a lot cheaper to do it on a motorcycle than in a car. But the bottom line is that we don't equate driving a chariot furiously as anything very much like Jesus. But in this little booklet entitled Armageddon, Professor W.R. French, who was then professor of theology at the Washington Missionary College Seminary of the late 40s, early 50s, before Andrews became the seminary for the denomination. What seminary we had was located at Washington Missionary College. Professor French was a teacher there, professor then. And in this booklet entitled Armageddon, he says that Jehu was a type of Christ, predating the destruction of the latter-day Baal worshipers at Armageddon by nearly 3,000 years. And you say, well, how did that all work out? Well, you remember Jehu rode up to the gates of Samaria and talked her servants to throw Jezebel off the balcony. And they did. And she landed and broke her neck. The dogs licked up her blood. And then he went and turned and left and went to find out all the sons and all the house of Ahab. And then he returned with one associate. His name was Jehonadab. Jehonadab was a Rechabite. Now, Rechabites were loyal to Yahweh. And they also, because their father had told them, do not ever get drunk, for several generations, none of them had touched any wine. I think they were the prototype Seventh-day Adventists, because they didn't have any alcohol. And he, with one helper, Jehonadab, went back to the city of Samaria. I want to call your memory to remember that, the center of cultic Baal worship, at least among the Israelites then, to fulfill one final mission of judgment, and you might even call it vengeance. And through deception, Jehu lured every Baal worshiper into public, saying, we're going to have a grand feast. You thought that Ahab was a servant of Baal, and we're going to have a greater feast of Baal than there's ever had before. And in turn, not only do you invited to show up, but you have to have a festal garment and at great expense. Jehu obtained robes, and they were to be publicly distributed to only two Baal worshipers. No Yahweh worshiper, anyone suspected of ever having any allegiance to Yahweh, is allowed to participate in this feast. This was exclusive entrance only. And of course, they all assembled dressed in their Baal robes. But at a predetermined signal, all of the Baal worshipers, identified so by their apparel, were slaughtered to rid the land of every Baal worship they could find. Now the question is, was this act a type of Christ himself in judgment? That's what he posed so long ago, W.R. French. Say, I don't know, that sounds much like Jesus. Well, let's let the Bible give a voice. It seems that at least one Old Testament prophet thought so. And here's what he said, Zephaniah 1:7. Hold thy peace at the presence of the Lord God, for the day of the Lord is at hand. For the Lord has prepared a sacrifice. He hath bid his guest, and it shall come to pass in the day of the Lord's sacrifice, I will punish the princes, the king's children, and all such as are clothed with strange apparel. Now we think about strange in this context. The Hebrew word is used for alien, foreign, and it becomes connected to illicit action when we think of the behavior of man with a strange woman. There's some things that you just don't do. And so we think of Jesus' own parable of a wedding, and that there were garments provided for the guests, and the man who came with his own apparel, which in this case was considered strange because it wasn't the apparel he was asked to wear, and he was kicked out of the feast. Clearly, there are many versions of strange apparel in Babylon, but only Christ's righteousness covers the nakedness in your character. And of course, anciently in the story, it could get you kicked out of a feast, but in Zephaniah's prophecy, it can get you killed. Well, apparel is sort of important to Bible times and Bible themes. Revelation 19:7, there is joy in heaven when anybody who has ever waited for their girlfriend or their wife to be ready for an event, all heaven is ready because we earthlings, with the church, we're the ones that are delaying this celebration. They are saying this, let us be glad and rejoice and give God glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come. Now, why is it now going to happen? Because his wife has made her. He's finally ready to get married. And it was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. If you're looking in the King James, it's going to say clean and white. For the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. But although the King James Version, white, which is symbolic of purity, follow the Greek. Because the Greek word for this is katharos, from where we get the word katharos. It means the idea of freeing of every blemish, every impurity, emptying of everything negative. There is nothing negative to be said about the Church of Jesus at this point. The Church of Jesus is pure at last. That's a spiritual victory of a spiritual battle. The emptying of everything negative. And the exact opposite situation is the failing to keep one's garment, ending up walking naked into the battle of Armageddon. We need a faith that grows into righteousness because it's a precious gift. We can deny it, we can delay it, we can abandon it, but if we receive it, it can be ours. What's keeping that from happening? Well, if you go back to chapter 3 of Revelation, there's something called Laodicean complacency. We're a movement. We're marching to Zion. God is with us. We're making progress. Leave us alone. Don't bug us. We're rich and increased with goods. We don't really need too much more. We need to sacrifice everything to get the righteousness Jesus is offering us. So in closing, I just have this little insight, Gospel Workers, page 113, of how this happens. Daily, the worker for God must learn the meaning of self-surrender. You thought you did it once. Daily, you're going to do it, and you're going to find out you only knew a little bit about it. You do it all your life. You begin to get the meaning of this word, self-surrender. We must study the Word of God, learning its meaning, obeying its precepts. Thus, that worker may reach the standard of Christian excellence. Day by day, God works in him or her, perfecting the character that is to stand in the time of final test. My question for you is Jesus able to do this? Amen. Day by day, the believer is working out before men and angels a sublime experiment showing what the gospel can do in and for fallen human beings. You and I are, and we hope that God pulls it all off. You recognize this hole in the ground filled with water? Matthew 16:18 tells the story, brought Jesus to a point of prophecy. He's there at this spot with his disciples at a grotto in Caesarea Philippi. It's a spring of water, literally. It's still there. But his disciples were right there. And this is where Jesus had this thing where he said, you're Peter, you're a stone, and on this stone, this sure stone, meaning himself, I will build my church. But remember, as he builds his church, he makes a prophecy, and the gates of, you can say that word in church, hell shall not prevail against it. He's making a prophecy that the church is going to win against the gates of hell. And from the very beginning, there has been a siege by the church against the gates of hell. But how does that tie into this? Well, the pagans of that area thought that the water of this spring formed a gateway to the underworld, where their gods, their pagan gods, did detestable deeds. And so they would gather there in ritual worship, and they placed idols on the ledges surrounding this spring. And throughout the region, Caesarea Philippi, this spring was known as the gate of hell. So when Jesus talked about the gate of hell, he had a visual display for those who were concrete thinkers that the pagan powers of mysticism and occultism would not prevail against the church of Jesus and the everlasting gospel. So Jesus looked at this impotent display of pagan reverence and declared that all the gates of hell could not stop his church. And by this act, he assured his fledgling group of disciples so long ago of the ultimate victory in the cause of the everlasting gospel. The final siege against the gates of hell ends in victory for all those who are on Jesus' side that day. And so I'm inviting you to watch, to pray, to look forward to that event, that final siege, because what a day to be living when we celebrate that final victory in and with and through Jesus, our Savior. See, some think that the final siege is one of the armies of earth arrayed against the remnant church. And certainly Old Testament prophets talked about siege of Mount Zion, but to apply that to Revelation is simply wrong. Mount Zion is never going to be forced into a defensive position. We are always on the offense against the gates of hell. And so, I'm just thinking, who wishes, who's thought, who's been animated, and activated that you would like to testify to your desire with a whole heart to be with Jesus no matter what the battle or how severe the test. You want to be with Jesus. You want to put on the armor. You want to walk with him. You want to have victory with him. And this is not just a creative way to end a series or a sermon or close an hour. But it's an opportunity if you want to publicly testify to your faith, your consecration to the cause of Jesus' cross. If that's your desire to make a testimony before you leave today, I'm going to invite you to just stand, and we're going to ask God to pray over this testimony that you're having today and the one you want to have all the way to the final siege. Father God, as people are still standing up, I pray that they will sense that this testimony to give them power, to give them an outpouring of the Holy Spirit, to give them courage, renewed optimism, renewed focus in their life. They're called to be winners through Jesus Christ. They're called to a tremendous victory. Some may be called to be victorious at the cost of martyrdom, but that will be a small price to pay as the cause of Jesus moves inexorably to the battle of Armageddon, the final battle, and Satan and his minions will be overcome at last through the power that is in Jesus Christ. Keep us, we pray, in that power by his might. Amen. You can sit down. Our closing song, but remember, you are called to participate in the lasting